If it's Wednesday, we are live in Battleground, Pennsylvania, on the heels of possibly the most closely watched debate of these midterms, with Senate control on the line. It's a special Meet the Midterms edition of Meet the Press Now, and it begins right now. Hello there, and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd. I'm in beautiful Battleground, Pennsylvania. I'm coming to you live from PNC Park, home of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Sorry, Baltimore, this might be America's best Major League ballpark. We are here in the Keystone State because of the big contest coming up. I'm not talking about Phillies Astros or Eagles Steelers, but the huge midterm slate next month that could dictate the balance of power in the Senate and decide who oversees this battleground state's next presidential election. Senate control runs through Pennsylvania. There's also a governor's race here on the ballot, a couple of House toss-up seats that we're keeping an eye on as well. So 13 days out from Election Day, we are laser-focused on this state. Keystone State gives a whole new meaning to that nickname, right? It is the keystone to the Senate. So let's start with the marquee Senate race here. Last night was the one and only debate between the Democratic nominee John Fetterman and the Republican nominee Mehmet Oz. The Fetterman campaign tried to significantly lower expectations ahead of time, as Fetterman is still recovering from a stroke he suffered just days before his primary victory in May. There was a closed captioning system on stage last night that was there to help him with his ongoing auditory processing issues. But even so, what we saw last night in answer after answer was a candidate that did struggle to articulate his thoughts clearly, and someone who had a tough time stringing his answers together. Listen to this exchange from Fetterman on fracking.
I've always supported fracking, and I always believe that independence with our energy is critical, and we can't be held, ransom to somebody like Russia. I've always believed that energy independence is critical, and I've always believed that, and I do support fracking.
You're saying tonight that you support fracking, that you've always supported fracking, but there is that 2018 interview that you said, quote, I don't support fracking at all. So how do you square the two?
I do support fracking, and I support fracking, and I stand and I do support fracking.
For what it's worth, Fetterman did not have to agree to this debate. And after seeing his performance, there are a lot of Democrats wondering why his campaign decided to put him in this position. To be sure, while Fetterman had his struggles, Oz stumbled a few times as well, particularly with this answer on abortion that has already been turned into a digital ad by the Fetterman campaign.
There should not be involvement from the federal government in how states decide their abortion decisions. As a physician, I've been in the room when there's some difficult conversations happening. I don't want the federal government involved with that at all. I want women, doctors, local political leaders, letting the democracy that's always allowed our nation to thrive to put the best ideas forward so states can decide for themselves.
That line, local political leaders, is something you're probably going to hear a lot from the Fetterman side of things over the next 13 days. Folks, elections are generally not won or lost on the debate stage, at least on the level below president. And in this political environment, party identity may matter more to voters than anything else. In fact, if you look at our most recent NBC poll, about 80% of Republicans and an equal number of Democrats, 80%, say the other side's policies would lead America, democracy to ruin. So it stands to reason that a lot of those voters are going to back their party's preferred candidate no matter what qualms they have about the candidate themselves. We also saw the power of party ID in the number of voters who told our pollsters they'd back a morally compromised candidate, particularly if it meant keeping the other side from winning. But in a tight race, everything matters. If this is a race decided by 50,000 votes, then yes, this debate will be that impactful. This morning, I sat down with three self-identified independent voters here in Pennsylvania to find out what matters most to these swing voters and how last night's debate could factor into their decision. Here's part of our discussion when I asked them their impressions on Fetterman's performance and how it colored their thinking ahead of Election Day.
I think it was very difficult to watch. I kind of felt sorry for him up there. Of course, he had a stroke and he's suffering, and his doctors say that, he's fit to serve. But I had a hard time comprehending what he was trying to, convey.
I felt almost, bad for John Fetterman. I think there's no question that his social media campaign has been very sharp and good and appealing. But when he got on the debate stage, I couldn't really understand a lot of the points he was making. And on the other side, I thought Oz looked pretty sharp. I think sounded like a politician. And I don't know that Fetterman was really able to convey many of his positions on issues.
I have a background in the military as a medic and saw many people suffer traumatic brain injuries. So I keep that in mind as I am, viewing what Fetterman is going through. He's healing, and I don't think we would hold that against anybody else if they had a broken arm and they were healing. So he's on his road to recovery, and we kind of have to keep that in mind. It's the human side of him.
Is there something Fetterman can do to reassure you?
I think it's doubtful.
I think about, my buddies that came home with traumatic brain injuries, and that's exactly what a stroke is.
Right.
So keeping that in mind and seeing how so many of my friends have come home and functioning perfectly fine. So I keep that in my mind as I consider what everybody else saw on the stage last night.
I think if he faces the voters, faces the public a little bit more often, I think if he can show that he is improving, and that if he is going to be in office, his injury or his stroke won't affect his ability to serve.
I also asked those voters what's weighing on them and what's really driving their vote on November 8th. Here was their response.
I think number one, what comes down to me for what I vote, I'm a young, about to be professional, and I think I'm looking at the world right now, and I'm looking at economic conditions. I'm looking at what the economy's doing, prices of goods, gas, things like that, and what it's going to be like for me to get a mortgage one day. I'm looking at that economic situation, and I think more than anything, that's driving my vote, so I'm looking for a candidate that's going to provide that.
I'm undecided because I'm demoralized with electoral politics altogether, And
why is that? Tell me more about that.
Well, it's because the neighborhood that I'm from, for example, I'm from Homewood, and whether it's a Democrat or Republican in the White House or in the governor's mansion, or a Democrat, in the mayor's house, our neighborhood never changes. So like my concern is like social economic conditions of particularly poor and black neighborhoods all over this state.
I have a young son, so I am thinking about some of the social issues that are going on in our society, and raising my son and what the future is going to look like for him. So much like Mike with the economy and inflation, it's hurting all of us, but also with social issues and the world that I want my son to be able to grow into.
Marilyn, are you satisfied with these four nominees, the governor and Senate race, or do you feel as if they're sort of thrust upon you?
Yeah, they're thrust upon me. Yeah. Absolutely. Mike put it well. They're out of touch. They're out of touch with what Pennsylvanians are.
Joining me now is one of last night's debate moderators, Lisa Sylvester from our Pittsburgh affiliate, WPXI, and from Harrisburg is our NBC News correspondent, Dasha Burns. Both of them has experiences, Dasha having interviewed Fetterman in this closed caption system, Lisa with the debate. So, Lisa, I want to start with you. Did you do anything different to prepare for this debate? And if so, what was it?
I think with the debate, the closed captioning was, I've done debates before, but
right.
That is something that is entirely different. I think even when you're asking the question, you have to make sure that you are enunciating and being clear, because you have to remember.
Did you take a beat back?
Well,
Did you dial it back a little bit?
I think that there are real humans. The way the closed captioning, and I got a chance to see it beforehand, you have real humans behind the screen, essentially, typing up your words in real time. And so I think there was a sense of making sure that we enunciate, that we are speaking loudly and clearly, because the candidate there, we have earpieces and we can hear each other and so forth. But, there's a great deal of distance between us where we're sitting at the table and where he's standing at the podium. So there were things like that to just be aware of, or to be just to think about, as opposed to other debates where you would not have to deal with things like that.
And sometimes you crosstalk as a moderator, you sometimes want to let it happen. That's part of the debate. I take it this was a more difficult situation and when to decide to allow crosstalk and not.
Well, it was straddling the line a little bit. And I personally did not see Fetterman until he walked out there at the podium. So I wasn't aware. We know that he's had these auditory
Did they not
processing.
test the system
Oh, they
beforehand?
did. They did.
Right, so
and the candidates did as well. They came through. Both candidates came in earlier, and they had a chance to test out the system. And they did. I mean, they spent not just a quick run through.
Right.
I was not there when that happened, though. So my first watching of how he answers the question, and you could see there were pauses because he has to read the question.
Right.
So, I mean, if you rattle off the question really quickly, that's where you saw those pauses where it took some time for it to populate on the screen.
As a moderator, did you decide, you obviously had to limit the number of questions you could ask because you knew everything was going to be a little slower. Did you cut back on topics or cut back on the number of questions for each topic?
Well, I mean, you obviously with the debate, you over-prepare. So you have, I mean, we had a bunch
You had a 3-hour debate.
Oh, we
right?
had
You
a
were
lot
ready for
more
a 3-hour debate.
questions. So, I mean, we prepare for as if this is going to go longer.
Yeah.
As with any debate, though, you don't know how much they're going to go into it, how much time you need to get for rebuttals. So that was sort of fluid. I mean, we obviously knew the big topics: economy. You heard some of the people, the voters that you talked to, the economy, security, safety. I mean, these are all things, abortion. We knew sort of the hot button topics that we had to hit. But there were a lot of things that I think that viewers wanted to hear. And we were trying to find issues where you could really find something that would differentiate the candidates. And there are clear differences. Voters have a choice here.
How, this is such a internationally followed race, okay? This is the one race that when Japan's correspondents come over, they're coming to Pennsylvania to cover, hey, it's this Oz-Fetterman race. How localized do you still find it? Pennsylvania to me there's central Pennsylvania, there's western Pennsylvania, and there's Philly. People are very proud of their little corner of Pennsylvania. Given how national and internationalized this race has gotten, are you still seeing that kind of regionalism and factionalism in the state?
Very much so. I mean, at the end of the day, one of these two men will represent this state, and that's really what it comes down to. Will represent the state of Pennsylvania in the Senate. So when you're talking about the issues and you're talking about the questions, I mean, some of them are very specific. Fracking, for instance, that is an issue that's very specific to the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, obviously it has implications outside.
Sure, but there's only a handful of states that are really doing this as aggressively as Pennsylvania.
And then there are the national issues, things like the economy. There was a foreign policy question, for instance, as well.
So let me ask you, given your history here in the western part of the state, do you expect Fetterman to overperform out here since he's of the area and Oz is more considered an eastern Pennsylvania guy? Or is party going to trump the geographical divides that we've gotten used to?
I think that, Fetterman is from here. That was one of the things that he has said over and over. You've heard the comments that that Oz has kind of parachuted in and is, he's... But I think it's hard to tell with this particular debate because is it going to be performance or is it going to be policies that voters ultimately kind of latch onto when they cast their ballots? And by that, I mean, you will have, you even had the graphic there. Democrats are going to vote a certain way. Republicans are going to vote a certain way. It's really that narrow band of those independent. Right, exactly. Those three independent voters. Yeah. And the question is what's more important to them, the policy or his performance? And I think that's what's going to play out across the state.
Or jersey color. To put in those, the red and the blue.
Right.
Anyway, Lisa, debate moderation, congratulations.
Oh,
well-run debate.
Thank you.
And, I hope more candidates realize debates are a good thing, not a bad thing.
Right. And it's good. I mean, it's for the voters. At the end of the day, it's to get information before the voters.
When are you ever going to have a conversation about fracking with these candidates? Right. I mean that in a, that's what the debates are for.
Right.
Anyway, so
absolutely.
Nice work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Dasha Burns is on the other side of the state, which is why she's not here. So, Dasha, look, you interviewed him first through this closed captioning. I'm curious your impression of what you saw versus the person you interviewed a few weeks ago.
Yeah, Chuck, you know, it was interesting hearing Lisa talk about sort of being in that room for the first time with him and watching that unfold in real time. We, of course, had been in a room with him before. We had used that closed captioning system. And so for us watching the debate, there were no big surprises. It was very similar to the conversation that we had. And, of course, we posted the entire interview online as well after we conducted that, so folks can go back and look. He is clearly still struggling with some of those issues. The campaign beforehand, you mentioned, did play down some of the expectations, saying, look, this isn't his format. The closed captioning may play a role in how long it takes him to get those answers out. And you played some of those moments where he did struggle to articulate some of his positions. But, Chuck, it was interesting, the contrast from the campaign on the night before the debate versus the night of the debate right after in that spin room. The campaign came in, a spokesperson saying that they were thrilled with Fetterman's performance, saying that he won in countless exchanges with Oz. They were very enthusiastic about how Fetterman did, especially comparing it to his performance in the primary. But, you know, stepping back and looking at some of the reactions and the aftermath today, I don't know that that's how much of the audience read it, especially those that were sort of seeing him for the first time in this context. Both Democrats and Republicans, I've talked to voters, are concerned about his health. Even folks that are still, you know, willing and eager to vote for him. It was, I think, a little bit of a surprise to people who hadn't really seen him in that capacity before, Chuck.
We spent a lot of time talking about John Fetterman. Let's talk about Mehmet Oz here a minute.
Yeah.
Is the campaign trying to re-explain the line about local political leaders and the abortion decision?
In short, no. We actually asked that question. I talked about the spin room. Neither candidate came to talk to media afterwards, by the way, but both campaigns sent spokespeople out. And we asked the Oz spokesperson what he meant by that, women, doctors, and local political leaders. And the campaign simply said, reiterated his position on abortion, that he's pro-life with the exceptions of rape, incest, and the life of the mother. Instead, Chuck, it's interesting, the day after the debate, both campaigns beating the drum they've been beating for the last couple of months here. The Fetterman campaign focused on abortion, putting out that ad today. The Oz campaign focused on crime. Just a couple of hours ago, Oz wrapped up an event with the Pennsylvania State Troopers, the Fraternal Order of Police, and Nikki Haley, all focused on law enforcement, saying that he differentiated himself last night at that debate with his answers on crime. Again, going after Fetterman for his record on clemency. So everyone sort of back to their corners, back to their talking points today, Chuck.
I was just going to say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Dasha Burns on the other side of the state force. Dasha, thank you. Coming up, Democrats from different sides of this state are going to join me here to discuss the different sides of the Democratic Party and what it means for the future. You're watching a special Meet the Midterms edition of Meet the Press Now, live from Battleground, Pennsylvania. Still know how they won 2 weeks ago. Welcome back. So what is more important for voters when they walk into the voting booth? The candidate or the party ID? Here's what those self-described independent voters told me today.
I'm going to be thinking about the individual candidates.
Right.
And I think that's what everybody should be doing. You know what I'm saying? I think we should challenge the two-party system altogether. But we should also challenge the notion that you have to be blindly loyal or faithful to your party just cause. You see what I'm saying? And that kind of like disregards a lot of these people's platforms. You know what I mean? And like,
you expect to have different candidates from multiple parties on your ballot?
Absolutely.
You'll be voting? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we should.
Yeah. Are you going to be doing the same thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with what Mohammed said. Yeah. You can't have that blind loyalty to a party. Mm-hmm. There are so many issues that are affecting Americans today that we can't just, you have to think of the issues, you have to think of the candidate and what that candidate is going to represent for us.
I'm joined now by former Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto and Pennsylvania State Representative Malcom Kenyatta, who's from the Philadelphia area, the two wings of, I guess, the state.
That's right.
I won't make the Carville joke that he used to talk about. It's Pittsburgh in the west, Philadelphia in the east, and he called it Alabama in the middle. But I want to talk about sort of the Democratic coalition, because the key to the western part of that coalition bill was union guys, union workers, union families, and that's not necessarily the Dem coalition here. How frayed is it?
I wouldn't call it frayed. I would say that it's more generational than it is ideological. So, you know, you see a lot of young voters, 32 and younger, who are pulled to urban centers, who are pulled to more progressive ideals than their parents are in the suburban areas where they may have grown up. And there's a similarity between the East and the West with that. Philadelphia is just a larger urban footprint than Pittsburgh is. So pulling together that part of the Democratic Party in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin becomes a critical part of finding a candidate who can speak to both.
Representative Kenyatta, you were a candidate for the Senate, and you were...
It was a whole thing. I remember that.
I do. It was a nice little thing. And look, a lot of people question your ability to win the primary because, well, he's a Philadelphia guy. Yeah. How's he going to do well in the rest of the state? What did you learn about campaigning across the state that either reinforced that stereotype or blew it up?
You know, I think it's completely wrong. You know, I've been to 32 counties just since the primary was over for John Fetterman, for Josh Shapiro, for Democrats who are running for the state house, for Congress. The issues that we're talking about in Philly and Pittsburgh aren't that different. I think that voting is a self-interested thing, and people are thinking about their kids, their families, the cost of things in their house, in the future that they're going to see in their communities. And a lot of those issues are the same. Certainly we have our regional distinctions. We have things that are a little bit more pronounced in different areas. But I never felt like I needed to have a different message or show up as a different person, you know, when I'm in Philly versus when I'm in Altoona or when I'm in Scranton or when I'm in Pittsburgh. I think the Pennsylvanians have a good BS detector, and I think you have to show up and talk to them about what matters. And frankly, as big as we are, as diverse as we are, those issues aren't that different. And that's what I believe.
Let me ask both of you about the debate last night. You think Fetterman should have done the debate?
Absolutely. I think that Democrats, we believe in democracy, okay? We believe in this democratic experiment, and a part of that is standing up in front of voters and making your case. I think he blew up one of the arguments that you heard from Dr. Oz's team, that he was like not cognitively there. He followed all the issues that were happening, that were discussed, excuse me. He talked about his message. He talked about his record. He defended his record against the onslaught of ads that we've seen. And frankly, I think he got Dr. Oz to make some really big mistakes, most notably this idea that abortion should be left between a woman, her doctor, and local politicians. Dr. Oz has tried to pretend like Doug Mastriano doesn't exist. Even at the Trump rally, they wouldn't go on stage together. Yeah. But now we know the guy that that Mastriano is the same person that Oz supports.
Where are you on this?
On the question,
should Fetterman have done this debate?
Yeah, I think that the question that the Oz campaign put forward was he wasn't able to debate, and he wasn't able to serve as a senator. You know, a lot of us have had loved ones who've had strokes. You know, I had the experience with my mom when she was 89. And you know that the process that you go through after a stroke, she couldn't even clench her hand when asked to do so. And she came back.
Right.
John's a young guy in his 50s. John's going to get better. Dr. Oz is not. He is still going to be Dr. Oz. He does not stand for values of what Pennsylvania believes. I mean, we've seen poll after poll that shows that Americans do not believe that politicians should be making choices about abortion. Yeah. Yet he wants this representative in that room with the doctor and the woman making the decision for a woman whether or not she should terminate a pregnancy. He is so far off base, yet he spins it to make it seem as if John Fetterman's position, which represents Pennsylvanians, is the extreme position.
You just said yourself, you've been traveling around the state. There's been a debate inside the Democratic Party. Should they be lean heavily into abortion rights, or do they need a better economic message? What would you say?
I think it's both. First of all, abortion is an economic issue, and I think to dismiss it as such is to miss the forest for the trees here. Anybody who has a kid or is thinking about having a kid, you're thinking about, can I provide for that child? What is it going to mean for their education and their schooling? There are a lot of costs associated with having a child, and Republicans don't tend to at least promote an agenda that would help women and families once the baby is born. They stop at having the baby. Democrats are promoting a message that is about lifting up families economically. And I said this earlier today. I think one of the debate moments that is not getting nearly enough attention is Dr. Oz's inability to say anything that he would do on inflation. You would think for a guy who says inflation every single day, like he's Dorothy trying to get home from Oz, that he would know what he wants to do. But all he can do is say the word. He has no idea of what it would take to actually lower costs for families. And so I think we saw last night he has no clothes on this issue.
On the issue of the economy, you think Democrats are talking enough about it? I mean, you're watching these races around here, the 17th congressional district, some of these other races.
Yeah.
Is it too much abortion rights, or is it the balance?
I think
right?
we have to go back to another James Carville saying, it's the economy, stupid. It's all based upon the economy. I think one of the messages that the lieutenant governor was making last night was when Dr. Oz was trying to make this absurd argument that John hadn't done anything about crime. I mean, number one, what has Dr. Oz ever done in his life to address it? A mayor has to deal with it 24/7. John moves into one of the most downtrodden communities in the state of Pennsylvania that lost 90% of its population, calls it home and raises his family there, while Oz is out living in Hollywood. And to then say to a man who basically was able to end homicide of young black men in that community that you're soft on crime. Here's why it comes back to the economy, and here's what John was saying. You want to take a gun out of a young person's hand, put a paycheck in it. It's about the economy on crime. It's about the economy on abortion. It's about the economy on tying these issues together.
You'd lean stronger into making sure people saw the economic ties.
Job training and opportunity, workforce training, all this money that the Biden administration has put into the transference of jobs into a new economy. I'm sorry, Representative, but Allegheny County now has more people employed in renewable energy than Philadelphia.
Oh, listen, I'm excited about that.
All right, before I let you go, one of the cases you were making of why you should be the nominee is that you would get the vote necessary out in Philadelphia. There's been some questions about whether Fetterman's going to get that vote out. What say you?
Well, listen, I say that he's going to be doing a rally with me on Saturday at 1 o'clock at Temple University. We'd love to have you. We're going to be having people there. And we're going to be making the case, as John has been all across the Commonwealth, about why he should be our next United States
Senator. Are you concerned about turnout in Philly?
I'm concerned about turnout everywhere, but not because I think the campaigns are not doing what they need to do, but because in a campaign you have to always run like you're 30 points behind, and so I'm superstitious. You got to work hard.
Bill Peduto, the former mayor here of Pittsburgh, like I've said before, I hope not to be invited back in October here to PNC Park. I'd like to know that there's a playoff game.
I hope to invite you in October for a World Series.
There you go. And,
I think we're going to keep it for now.
Yeah, you get to go back to Philly and go celebrate with my guy Bryce Harper.
That's right.
So, all right, Malcom Kenyatta, thank you both. Up next, we'll have much more ahead from Battleground, Pennsylvania. We're going to get one of the co-chairs of the Oz campaign to get their take on how they feel like they did last night. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Election Day is less than 2 weeks away, in case you didn't know. But Pennsylvania voters are voting now. More than 630,000 have already voted early. That's nearly 3/4 of them, by the way. 73% are Democrats. Those votes are pouring in as both the Oz and Fetterman campaigns prepare to make their final pitches to voters following last night's debate. And that brings us to our next guest. With me now is John Bartos. He's the co-chair of Oz's campaign and also a senior advisor for the Campaign for Mideast Policy. Mr. Bartos, I know you've been a candidate before. Thank you for coming on, spending a few minutes with me.
Chuck, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So, look, I know the campaign feels good about the debate last night, but why did you believe you needed this debate last night to be on stage with Fetterman? Why was it so important to have the face-to-face?
Well, I think, first of all, greetings from the Philadelphia suburbs. I wish I could be out there with you in Pittsburgh, but greetings from the Philadelphia suburbs, where we're about 48 hours away from rooting on our Phils here in the World Series. So, look, until last night, John's campaign, I know John very well. I campaigned against him for the lieutenant governor's job back in 2018. His campaign was snarky tweets, memes, and a bubble around him, not taking questions from reporters. And so what we saw last night, when he finally had to answer questions from the moderators and get back and forth with Mehmet Oz, the contrast in this race couldn't be clearer, and voters can now see it. With John, he's campaigned from day one as being that so-called 51st vote. And I think that effectively means that he's given his proxy, if he were a senator, to Chuck Schumer. And he has doubled and tripled down on radical policies that are out of line and out of the mainstream here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And on the other side of the stage last night, you had Mehmet Oz, who once again articulated, as he has throughout this campaign, articulated an optimistic vision for taking the Commonwealth forward, working together, reaching across the aisle. And Chuck, this is something that I talked about in my campaign. It's something that you guys talk about a lot in the media, reaching across the aisle. And Mehmet talked about that numerous times last night, reaching across the aisle, working with Democrats, working with independents, working to bring common sense policies forward that not only move the Commonwealth forward, but by extension moves America forward. I think the contrast couldn't be clearer. On the one hand, you have a proxy vote for Chuck Schumer. On the other hand, you have an optimistic, common sense physician, heart surgeon who wants to go solve problems as he has his whole career.
Let me get at the one debate moment that certainly the Fetterman campaign believes was a gaffe on your candidate's part, and that is the idea of local political leaders being in the room to decide when or if an abortion is performed. He emphasized he didn't want the federal government involved, but he talked about local political leaders. How is that any better?
Well, I think what else would you expect the Fetterman campaign to be talking about, right? I mean, all day I've been reading observations from this debate, and so-called unnamed Democrat sources across the Commonwealth are saying what a disaster the debate was last night for the Democrat candidate. And so all they have to do is kind of double and triple down. We have seen, unfortunately, polluted across the airwaves here in Pennsylvania, tens of millions of dollars of negative advertising trying to scare Pennsylvanians into believing that somehow Dr. Oz has some radical views on abortion. These ads have said, for example, that he doesn't believe in any exceptions, when, of course, voters heard last night very clearly from the candidate he believes in exceptions for rape, incest, and, of course, to protect the life of the mother. Those ads have said he doesn't believe in any exceptions. Dr. Oz believes in exceptions. He is pro-life with those exceptions, and he has said very clearly, I mean, I've heard him answer this question many times, he does not believe the federal government should be involved at all in making decisions. That's left to the people of each state through their elected representatives. Now, again, I mean, I've read today, too, you have very powerful leaders in Philadelphia saying something like ward leaders will be in the room with the doctor and the patient, and then you have other people talking about the gubernatorial candidate. I think, let's put the absurdity aside, and what Mehmet was saying, of course, was that this should be the people deciding through their elected representatives. That's what the Supreme Court said, and that's is now the law of the land.
So is it fair to say that he does not have the same views on abortion that Doug Mastriano has? He does not want Doug Mastriano in that room?
Well, no, what I would say is that he has been very clear, and I'm not going to speak for the Mastriano campaign. I'm the co-chair of the Oz campaign, but I will say Mehmet has been crystal clear. He is pro-life with three very clear exceptions. In the event that the pregnancy is the result of rape, incest, or, of course, to protect the life of the mother. And he has said it's up to the people through their elected representative. For example, today in Pennsylvania, it's my understanding, at least, I'm not in the state legislature, but that Pennsylvania law allows an abortion up to 24 weeks.
And so what you're saying is that's what Dr. Oz's position is, or it's whatever Pennsylvania decides?
He trusts the voters. Now, I mean, Chuck, I had the honor of campaigning a couple times statewide, and it is a true honor. And I know you had Malcom on before, and Malcom and I did the debate coverage last night from Altoona. We had a great time together. He's terrific.
That's what he told me off air. Yeah. So the fact that you said it on air, I guess it's true.
It's true. We had a great time. We had a great debate back and forth, and I would do that any time with him. And he's a bright leader here in the Philadelphia area and, of course, in North Philadelphia. So, but what the privilege and the honor of campaigning across this beautiful Commonwealth of 67 counties is what you quickly realize, if you're any good at this at all, is that the people are really smart. The voters are really smart, and people get it. And there's common sense. And Mehmet talked about that again. He talked about it last night. Common sense, balance.
Yeah.
We have a proud tradition here in Pennsylvania of sending common sense, really bipartisan senators and from senators from both parties to Washington to get things done. Mehmet will inherit a proud tradition of that when he gets to work in January.
It sounds like you're in the Philly suburbs. It sounds like, and I don't know if you'll say it this way, but you need split ticket voters. Do you think the governor's race is going in such a direction that you need people that are going to vote Josh Shapiro to vote for Oz in order to win?
Well, certainly. I mean, if I could divine the exactly what will happen or how voters are going to vote, I'd probably be doing your job, or you'd be hiring me to write on these things. But my sense of things, remember, I'm a guy who got 5% in the primary, so we're going to take what I say here with a grain of salt. But all kidding aside, I think voters, we have a proud tradition here in Pennsylvania of common sense leaders, really kind of practical, middle of the road, get things done with balance. And Mehmet talked about it time and again. And I really do wish you guys would give credit where credit is due on that. And maybe you have been covering it today. I apologize if I didn't see it. But that, it's rare to see today a candidate for high office talking about that, reaching across the aisle. And I think Pennsylvanians are going to be really eager to get out and vote for him.
Right. Well, we hear a lot about bipartisanship in October. I think a lot of voters wonder where it is in December, January, February, and all those other times. But we will leave that to another day. Jeff Bartos, co-chair of the Oz campaign, appreciate you coming on and sharing the campaign's perspective.
Thank you for having me. It really was an honor. Thank you.
Of course. Coming up, a new FBI report warns of threats facing Pennsylvania poll workers. We're going to have the state's top elections official on the show next. You're watching a special Meet the Midterms edition of Meet the Press Now, live from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. AC coming back on. We are back, and as we said, Pennsylvania is one of the key battleground states. Dare we call it the Keystone State this year, with an election denier on the ballot for statewide office. Republican candidate for governor Doug Mastriano has falsely claimed rampant fraud cost Trump in Pennsylvania. Senate candidate Mehmet Oz has at times also seems to flirt with the former president's false claims. The FBI is now warning of threats to election workers in Pennsylvania ahead of this year's midterms. In fact, a spokesperson for the Pennsylvania Department of State told Axios most of those threats are anonymous, often cryptic, and frequently imply that, quote, election officials are being watched. Earlier today, I asked my panel of Pennsylvania voters about election integrity. Here's what they had to say.
Do you feel like your vote's going to be counted fairly?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Mary?
Yeah, I believe it'll be counted fairly. My big issue is getting to vote during a primary and to figure out who's going to be on that ballot for the general elections and having my voice heard.
So joining me now is Lee Chapman, Pennsylvania's acting Secretary of the Commonwealth, whose office is in charge of overseeing the election. Appreciate you spending a few minutes. Let me talk about the threat issue. What has that done to poll worker recruitment? And do you feel confident you have enough security to handle these election threats?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, Chuck. And, hello from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where our capital is. Yes, unfortunately, we have seen an increase of threats since 2020. And, we have 67 counties here in Pennsylvania, and county election directors have actually left their jobs because of threats. Some have also left because of planned retirements, but we've had about 50 county election directors leave their jobs. And it's an unfortunate situation here in Pennsylvania because a lot of these threats are fueled by mis and disinformation about the election process here in Pennsylvania. So my goal as acting Secretary of State is to make sure we're educating voters, the public, the media, just about how the voting process works in Pennsylvania, how vote counting takes time. And because of the restrictions we have with our state law, we will not have unofficial returns on election night like other states.
And in fact, that's what I wanted to emphasize. I was hoping our entire segment would just be about clarifying this, because it's my understanding the law didn't change, which means explain when the mail-in ballots get to be opened and counted.
Yes. So in Pennsylvania, we do not have pre-canvassing ballots before Election Day. So election workers in our 67 counties can only start opening mail-in ballots at 7 a.m. on Election Day. And that includes opening them from the inner secrecy envelope, the outer envelope, flattening them, and scanning them. So they do all of that work between 7 a.m. and then starting at 8 p.m. when the polls close, that's when the counties can release the results. So it takes time. We're not like other states that have weeks to pre-canvass. Right. And that's something that we are asking for, you know, the administration, my department, the governor. We all want at least 2 weeks of pre-canvassing until the General Assembly here in Pennsylvania passes that. We're not going to have unofficial results on election night.
So it took about 4 days the last time. Is that just prepare people now, since this is the state that could decide Senate control? We're probably looking at days, correct?
Days, and it's hard to estimate. You know, we are having a high turnout already. About 1.3 million Pennsylvanians have already requested mail-in or absentee ballots. About half of those have been returned. So we will see, you know, as far as how many mail-in ballots counties will get. But the best we can do is just manage expectations and let voters know that election officials need to do their job. They need to ensure that they're counting every vote. And delays in results does not mean anything bad is happening. It doesn't mean ballots are showing up out of nowhere. It's because of that restriction where we can't start pre-processing or canvassing those votes until election morning.
If folks are watching, they want to be a poll watcher, right, for whatever reason, and they want to be a poll watcher, what are the restrictions of being a poll watcher? Can you just go to any polling location in the state, or do you have to be? Does it have to be in your home county? How does that work?
Sure. So poll watchers are individuals that are either appointed by, you know, a county or campaign to monitor basically election day in the polling place. And those poll watchers have to be from that county where they are registered to vote. So we can't have people from other parts of the state to be poll watchers. They have to be from that county. Gotcha. And we actually have extensive guidance on our website, which is vote.pa.gov, about how people can become poll watchers and what the restrictions are.
And at this point, do you have plenty of poll watchers and not enough poll workers, or how would you describe it? And do you need more poll workers for Election Day, or do you feel like you've got that ready?
You know, we always need more poll workers for elections here in Pennsylvania. We have about 9,100 polling places across the 67 counties. So in order to have a fully staffed polling place, you need about 5 poll workers per precinct. Yep. So that's around 45,000 people we need to have a full complement of poll workers on Election Day. And, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic really exacerbated the poll worker shortage. We still have seen a lot of those older poll workers who were doing it for many, many years didn't return after the pandemic. Right. So counties are still recruiting, they're still training, and it's something that is needed, especially in larger counties like Philadelphia.
Well, I'd love to see AP high school civics and government students be the poll workers. And you know, if you want to get civics lessons right there, maybe that's a good place to start, because they're future voters. But who knows? Secretary Chapman, good luck with the election. I think everybody wants to know that it goes smoothly. So thank you.
Thank you, Chuck.
Still to come, control of Congress could come down to swing districts, just like the one right here in the backyard of Pittsburgh. The Democratic candidate in Pennsylvania's 17th district will join us next on set. You're watching a special Meet the Midterms edition of Meet the Press Now. Welcome back to Pittsburgh. In our age of polarization, the concept of ticket splitting or voting for both Democrats and Republicans on the same ballot has mostly gone by the wayside. But here in Pennsylvania, it's going to have a real impact. In my conversation with those self-described independent voters, some are seriously thinking about splitting their ticket in the marquee races this November.
Generally leaning towards Oz on the Senate race and then leaning towards Shapiro on the gubernatorial race. I think Oz has done a good job at not taking too drastic of a stance on a lot of the social issues that...
Was that a concern of yours, that he was going to get closer to sounds like Mastriano's a little too much for you.
Yeah, I think it's a little too much for me. I think like I said, I think economics is what drives my vote first. Mm-hmm. That being said, 2024 is looming large in all of our minds, and the recent Supreme Court decision is looming large in all of our minds. And I just don't think that some of those social issues coming from Mastriano really, I think they're just out of touch with people my age generally.
We were talking earlier about having to pick a party.
Right.
I don't think we should have to pick. If there's splitting the ticket is, and I understand the argument against that. That primaries are picking your party's candidate. Mm-hmm. But until we become more than a two-party system, independence is what can bring us back to more to the middle.
Well, speaking of independent voters arguably got Conor Lamb into Congress in the 17th Congressional District. Well, joining me now is the Democratic House candidate that wants to replace Conor Lamb in the 17th District. It's Chris Deluzio. Mr. Deluzio, welcome.
Chuck, thanks for having me on.
And let me start with the ticket splitters. It's interesting. Conor Lamb had something that you don't have, which is he had a race all to himself, right? A special election that everybody was watching, but he got to be his own person. I even think he said, I'm not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi. He sent different messages to say, hey, I'm not a Washington Democrat. You're running on cycle. We're over $100 million in ads just for the Senate race. How hard is it to be an individual candidate when you're not in that Senate race?
Look, you're competing with lots of attention, as you say. But being a guy in Western Pennsylvania, we're sitting here on a brisk day in Pittsburgh. I've been talking about from the day I got in this race, my service. Someone who served this country in uniform, grew up right here, who's been fighting to make stuff in this country and bring our supply chains back home. I think folks, as they're experiencing rising costs, they expect someone from Western Pennsylvania to fight to do exactly that. Living in a place where behind us, these rivers, we used to have mills cranking out steel. We've suffered through globalization here in Western PA, and for us to bring down costs, we've got to be fighting to do exactly that, bring those factories and those jobs back. That makes me a Western Pennsylvania guy through and through, and it makes me my own candidate in a race like this.
Do you feel like the national brand of the Democratic Party helps or hurts in a district like the 17th?
I think it can go either way. Yeah. As someone who's just focused on running here, I ignore the noise. Look, we're running a campaign about bread and butter economic issues, about bringing those jobs back, fighting with our economic foes in China and other places who, frankly, have been kicking our butts, and they shouldn't be. And, look, it's not just economics. Folks are worried about abortion rights. We have strong contrast, certainly in my race. Guy aligned with Doug Mastriano who wants to ban abortion here in Pennsylvania. I think voters in Western Pennsylvania are pretty energized. Mm-hmm. And, frankly, it comes back to that basic thing of we're going to make stuff in this country and do it with union workers. I know that we can in around Pittsburgh.
So give some advice to Joe Biden. Because I think Joe Biden believes he's your type of Democrat. I think Joe Biden believes that that's what he was. And I think in the White House sometimes asks, Joe Biden's lost that perception, for better or for worse, that he's not, Conor Lamb invited one Democrat to campaign with him, right? Joe Biden.
Sure.
I'm guessing you wouldn't want Joe Biden walking around now because of the national conversation that brings. Give some advice to Joe Biden how he could fix that perception.
Stay tough on China. I know there's been debate in the administration of maybe coming back on some of the tariffs. I think that'd be a big mistake. Stay tough there. Mm-hmm. And we've got to be focusing on not just bringing supply chains back, not just bringing manufacturing back, but fighting the corporate greed. Mm-hmm. I mean, those folks in Washington have been running the show for decades. Mm-hmm. They pushed the bad trade deals. They pushed the anti-union right-to-work laws. And they've been pushing tax cuts for years.
How do you answer this question? I had a couple of voters say this to me. There have been plenty of new candidates to Congress. But every time I look up, it's the same four people running Congress, right? Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, I guess has not been there as long, right? Chuck Schumer, not quite as long. But it feels like the same people. The names below them change. So how do you make the case that you can make a difference and buck this?
Look, I'll be a freshman member of Congress from Western Pennsylvania. But it's a district that either party needs to win to hold a majority. It means I've got some leverage. I can throw some elbows
use the fact that you're in a swing district as leverage, the way New Hampshire and Iowa for years used their presidential power to get more dollars.
The job is to deliver for this region, and that matters to who's going to be in leadership and runs for those leadership positions. I don't give away my voter support. I got to deliver for this region as a new member of Congress, and that's what I intend to do.
What's been the hardest part of the national climate for you to run against?
Hardest part of the national climate. Look, I think people focus on all these races in Georgia or wherever else. We've got a governor's race in Pennsylvania. We got a Senate race, and we got my race as one of the most competitive House races in this country. And whatever the national talk may be, we have issues right here in Western Pennsylvania, especially around bringing our manufacturing and supply chains back. And we have a real threat on abortion, where if Doug Mastriano is the governor, they're going to ban abortion in this state. It's not like some of these other states where it's hypothetical. It is a very real threat here in PA.
What's your plan to get the Pirates in the playoff baseball?
I got to start spending some money. I'd like us to be watching some baseball here in October instead of sitting here chatting with you. No offense.
No, I'm glad to be here, but it kind of bothers me that, you know, as a kid, I practiced that Willie Stargell swing. I wasn't even left-handed, and I spun that bat and spun that bat. Anyway, be safe in the trail. We'll be watching your race.
Thanks, John.
Deluzio, 17th Congressional District. And thank you all for being with us this hour for the special edition of Meet the Midterms. We promised that we were going to go to both sides of this state. We were out east a few months ago. We're out here this time. You can catch even more analysis of the key midterm races on today's podcast episode of the Chuck Toddcast. It is available wherever you get your podcasts. My colleague Hallie Jackson picks up our News Now coverage live from another important swing state, my home state, Florida, and it's right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.